For most everyone, the date October 22nd, 1844 means next to nothing. It's not a date that's normally rendered in history books, and so we have to really know the event to really understand the significance of it. The context of it is that this is happening in America in the 1840s, about 20 years before the Civil War. The Panic of 1840, one of the few things I remember from history about that decade, and I really don't remember what they panicked about, except there was a great deal of economic confusion. I think is what happened, and a lot of recession, depression, those sorts of things. The Panic of 1840 stirred up some religious fervor as well. All it takes is a good economic panic, and people will begin to fear for their salvation. Also, in the 1800s, particularly in America, a rather aggressive strain of Protestantism had arisen. And it was a minister, his name was Reverend William Miller, made a name for himself. His followers were actually called Millerites when he began an excessively literal interpretation of the book of Revelation, our second reading that we heard this morning, as well as the prophet Daniel. By that I mean that he literally believed, based on his shrewd mathematical calculations, that he could discern that the second coming of Jesus Christ would happen on October 22nd, 1844. I can tell you that when I say an excessively liberal interpretation, it always astounds me when you get someone of a Protestant sect that will look at that and be so liberal about those dates that are so obviously figurative, and then not be literal about the words of our Lord, this is my body, this is my blood. That's a subject for another time. But nevertheless, this minister certainly let a good number of people know that if they were in the right place at the right time on October 22nd, 1844, they would be raptured into heaven. Well, I'm not popping the bubble by telling you it didn't happen. We wouldn't be here if it had happened. And in fact, one of the persons who was there wrote in his diary a few days later, I waited all Tuesday, October 22nd, and dear Jesus did not come. I waited all the forenoon of Wednesday and was well in body as I ever was. But after 12 o'clock, I began to feel faint, and before dark, I needed someone to help me up to my chamber, as my natural strength was leaving me very fast. And I lay prostrate for 2 days without any pain, sick with disappointment. The event is actually called the Great Disappointment. It involved more than just this man whose words we have for history, but in fact, thousands of people who sold everything they had, quit their jobs, and moved upstate New York where this event was supposed to happen, that didn't happen, hasn't happened, and is still yet to happen, and quite frankly, probably not in upstate New York. But who knows, right? You know, I think a modern version of the Great Disappointment, one that's a little bit more relevant to us in our time, the last great hit that Peggy Lee had in her storied career was in 1969. It was a purely existentialist song, which is called Is That All There Is? The song is about dealing with the inevitable disappointments and failures that happen in our life and trying to make some understanding of it. The story evolves over the singer's lifetime. She starts off as a child, their house burns to the ground and everything's simply gone, and she asks herself, is that all there is to a house? Is that all there is? Then her daddy takes her to the circus she'd always wanted to go, and then when she goes, she's disappointed. It wasn't quite what she thought it was. She, I guess, see through the magic, and she asks herself, is that all there is to a circus? Is that all there is? Final verse of the song, she is now an adult and has had a failed relationship, and she's quite bitter as a result of it, and she asks herself, is that all there is to love? Is that all there is? If you know the song, and I'm sure some of you do know it, the conclusion really does make the point about the Great Disappointment. It goes this way. I know what you must be saying to yourselves. If that's the way she feels about it, why doesn't she just end it all? Oh no, not me. I'm not ready for that final disappointment. Because I know just as well as I'm standing here talking to you that when that final moment comes and I'm breathing my last breath, I'll be saying to myself, the chorus of the song, is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friends, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball, if that's all there is. I'm all for breaking out the booze and having a ball, but I'm going to tell you that's not all that is. What I've just really versed for you is modern existentialism, which is, by the way, no different than ancient existentialism, which, by the way, is what happens when you're not a believer. By not being a believer in something that we cannot see, that we cannot experience, the fear is what we see is all there is. And that is the mother of all disappointments, because it won't end well if that's the only thing that we can see. Jesus has these scriptures in mind that are chosen for the fifth Sunday of Easter this weekend. I'm actually focusing on the first and second readings only because I think they really open the door for us for this idea, is that all there is. So in that first reading, Acts of the Apostles, it chronicles the first couple of decades where the apostles are growing the church, moving around the region, and establishing themselves. And there's a great line in that Acts of the Apostles reading we heard this morning that sounds at first blush like something out of a Chinese fortune cookie. It says, "We must endure many hardships to enter the kingdom of God." Even though that's called a prophetic statement, it turns out to be a very true statement, that the reality is that life involves hardships. It involves disappointments. It involves tragedies. It involves mysteries that we don't understand. Maybe only this way can we throw the context in the mass shooting of last night and all the other violence that seems accompanied with that, all the other craziness that is happening in our world. But you see, the apostles clearly grasped this to the extent that they could clearly grasp anything. We must endure many hardships. The sign of hardship does not mean there isn't joy. The sign of hardship does not mean everything's going to end badly. It's simply part of the process. And if you read the scriptures and believe them, it ends with the best of all happy endings. And we get a preview of that happy ending in the second reading, the book of Revelation. Revelation, as I've preached before, is an apocryphal book filled with all kinds of vivid imagery, and most people only get the part with the dragons and the beasts and the flames and all the mess, the whore of Babylon. They're all there in the book of Revelation, but the point of reading it, which is actually talking about the persecutions of the first century and telling those who were undergoing that they will endure those persecutions. It's chapter 21 that we hear this morning that's most important, where John has a vision and the Lord tells him, "See, I will create a new heaven and a new earth." That promise is right there. And then as he adds to that, he says, God will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or mourning, wailing or pain, for the old order has passed away. Behold, I make all things new. The answer to the question, is that all there is? No. On Good Friday every year, we hear from the same evangelist, John, the Passion, every Good Friday. And there's a key feature in that Passion that's worth mentioning here. Jesus is crucified with the thief to his right and the thief to his left, sometimes referred to as the good thief and the bad thief. The bad thief speaks first and rebukes Jesus for not bringing himself down from the cross, and while he's in the business of doing that, say the other two that are there in the first place. The good thief then speaks and mentions that he and the other thief are justifiably being crucified for their crimes. But he says that Jesus has committed no crime and is utterly innocent. And then the words we remember the most. He says to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied to him is equally beautiful. He says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." That word today, it's not the other ones that we hear him say, in a little while, in a long while, and at some point I will come. In fact, in another part of the scriptures, it even says, Jesus says, the Son of Man does not know the date or the hour when someone is coming. So if he doesn't know, why on heaven's earth do we think we would know? But Jesus very clearly communicating salvation, and it's understanding to us, says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And that's exactly where you and I are right here at nearly 11 o'clock in the morning at the corner of Baxter and Hepburn Avenue, and promises made by Jesus echoes out over time. He says, "Today you will be with me in paradise," and that is the lyrical way to describe the Eucharist that we're celebrating. I think the problem for the modern mind is, well, how can that possibly be? The event of the Eucharist that I'm describing was over 2,000 years ago, and none of us, although we feel rather old, are that old. We're not 2 millennia old. How can we even remember or recall such an event? We've only read about it, and we're not really sure if those details are accurate or not. Those are pretty genuine, legitimate questions, but the church has always understood that the liturgical act of worship that we're doing is not a representation. It's not a reenactment. It's none of those things. It's immediately present. That's the beauty of the Eucharist, that when the Eucharist is consecrated today, that the Jesus that is consecrated is one and the same Jesus who hung upon the cross and told the good thief, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Every instance of our receiving Holy Communion finds ourselves, even if it seems temporarily, in paradise. But it answers the question, is that all there is? No, something much greater is to come. All we need to do is believe, so that we have an answer to that question, is that all there is? Jesus knew there would need to be a mechanism whereby you and I could meaningfully, sacramentally participate in his life, and it's called memory. I speak about it at almost every funeral that I preach. When we think of memory, we think of it in the short-term sense. I certainly do at the age of 66, is that more often than not, I can't remember where things are. Keys, all books, whatever I need, the iPad when I need it, when I can't find it. So many things I can't remember where they are. I can remember the song lyrics, a Peggy Lee song from 1969, and can sing it to you perfectly, but I just would like to find my car keys, for heaven's sakes. And so the whole business we have about memory, it seems like there's some things we remember, some things that we can't. There are things that we wish we didn't remember, there are other things that we hope to remember. Memory seems like a very slippery thing, but Jesus, understanding memory more fully than you and I do, said at the consecration at the Last Supper, he said, "This is my body," he said, "This is my blood," but more importantly, the words that you will hear again this morning, "Do this in memory of me." Memory takes something past and makes it immediately and intimately present. That's what memory does. Even when we recall, the act of recalling is to summon the memory to our mind and make it present. It has the appearance of being a thing in the past, but the reality is the experience of the memory is in the here and now. "Today you will be with me in paradise." And you know, the thing with memory, of course, then is that it's how it contains all the different parts of our life. And so I've been reading recently a book from Frank Bruni. I've used it in homilies the last couple of weeks. Frank Bruni is a columnist for the New York Times, and he has the same eye disorder that I have. And his experience with it is a little more faithful than mine has been, which means he's had time to reflect upon what's happened to him, what might happen to him, and what lessons he's learned about life as a result, including the ability to cope with something that seems unthinkable. Just this last week, I came across another passage that I thought fit perfectly well here. He was taking his father out for a drive, and his father, obviously much older, his mother had already passed away, and the father missed her. It had already been several decades. And the father enjoyed these nostalgic drives, so they would drive by Frank's childhood home, then by the home that he moved into later, and by the house where his wife lived when he first met her, all of that kind of in the same neighborhood. So Frank was relating to us the story of taking his dad on what you might call a trip down memory lane. He says, "I know what you might," it would help if I turn the page. He says, "Being with him, looking at him, I saw that over the past 2 decades since Mom's death, his weakened mind had nonetheless done him an extraordinary kindness, taking a good marriage with a normal allotment of highs and lows and turning it into the grandest of romances, a fairy tale whose chapters and big scenes he could replay at will as an answer and a ballast to his grief. I saw that he was replaying one of those as we sat together. I saw that he was, at this late stage of the game, comfortable enough with me and comfortable enough with himself to do that. And I saw that what he felt as he did, it wasn't sorrow. It was gratitude. I took that in, hoping to learn from it and never forget it. This was a moment, intimate and exquisite. Into the storehouse of keepsakes it goes. Put enough of them there, and you build a powerful shield against despair. That's really the beauty of the gift of memory. It's something that's always there. It's good to have a little biochemical understanding of memory because it'll help make it make sense to us. Memory is an actual physical process of our brain. And if we could literally open up our head and look in the way a neuroscientist would look, we would see that our brain's filled with all kinds of synapses, and the electrical sparks, for lack of a better metaphor, are these senses, the thoughts, the thinking, the reactions that's happening in our brain. It's a very busy place, even when we are sleeping. And it is, of course, these synapses that sometimes as we age don't fire like they used to. It isn't that we've lost our memory or lost our mind, the phrase that we would use. We've lost the connection to the memories. But you see, they're still there. The apparatus just isn't working well, which makes those words from Jesus so precious. You see, I make all things new, so that ultimately when our mind is restored, and that's only going to come after death, it all comes back. Every last one of them. We never really lose our memory or lose our mind. We just sometimes lose that connection. And that's why liturgy is so important, because it teaches us that today we will be with the Lord in paradise. My therapist told me about 2.5 to 3 years ago that I should start reading some fiction. Now, most of my life I've read nonfiction, and because I'm a male who doesn't articulate feelings well, which is typical about 95% of us, she thought it would be a good idea for me to read fiction that would, in words, describe and state and feelings, so that I could come better in touch with them. And really, it's been quite something to actually read these books, to feel feelings, to see things not on the nonfiction level that turn out to be real truisms about our life. One of my favorite writers is a writer for young adults called Becky Albertalli, because she's this wonderful way with describing the way people think, both boys and girls. And so in one of the novels she wrote, I don't remember which one, there's a wonderful thing about memory that I do remember. It says this: when we say we want to freeze time, what we mean is that we want to control our memories. We want to choose which moments we will keep forever. We want to guarantee the best ones won't slip away from us somehow. So when something beautiful happens, there's the impulse to press pause and save the game. We want to make sure we can find our way back to that moment. The character that writes this, thinking about what struggles happening at the moment, then writes, "Here is where I landed. I picked now. Because whether I like it or not, my today brain is the only one that has our whole story. I'll take every bad memory if it means I get to keep the whole nesting doll." You see, memory is the complete sum of everything that happens, both good and bad. It all has to be there. It's what feeds the context. It's why we struggle with our memory. That's why we struggle with disappointment and we struggle with tragedy, because we're not seeing it fully in constant context. We're experiencing it in the moment, and yes, that's a really difficult thing to experience. Another line from Becky Albertalli's novel that I absolutely adore is this one: "I cannot wait to forget what missing you feels like." For all of us who've lost someone through death, we remember all together too well their time. And we know all together too well what missing them feels like. What a wonderful idea that when we greet each other again, we will then forget what missing you feels like. That forgetfulness lets us know that the experience we have, while difficult, is temporary. It's not permanent. That's why Jesus is saying in Revelation, "I will wipe every tear from their eyes." And why I preach literally at every funeral that our loved ones do not miss us the way we miss them when they are in heaven, because they're with us. We're the ones that need to cultivate that understanding that they've not gone anywhere, that they're here, that we have to adapt to them in a new and profound kind of way. Then I thought through it and I said, you know, one of the great singers of the 20th century, I've always loved her music, Barbra Streisand. In the song The Way We Were, the one that she's most known for, so beautifully encapsulates this phenomenon of memory. Memories may be beautiful, and yet, what's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. So it's the laughter we will remember whenever we remember the way we were. Back to that image of the nesting doll. I've always been intrigued by them. You know, I've been to Alaska 4 times on cruises, and each time was an attempt to look for a Russian nesting doll nativity set. I could find the tourist ones, and they were cheap looking. I wanted the ones that were really artistic, and they're well beyond my low priestly salary, but I would at least go and admire them. Some of them are Fabergé eggs, can you imagine that? But a nesting doll, if you don't know what that is a doll that came on the outer shell, looks like one thing, and contained inside of it smaller and smaller and smaller things. That's like the nesting doll. In the Becky Albertalli novel, the characters all speak about the nesting doll, the one I read for you, that our today brain has everything, our whole story. That's why our today brain is so real and so vivid to us. And what he says is, I will endure every bad memory if I can keep all of the memories. And he says it's safe there. It's in my nesting doll. For you and I, our today brain is the only brain we have. And Jesus greets us there. Today you will be with me in paradise. It's the conclusion of our journey that we're still undergoing. It's the answer to Peggy Lee's question, is that all there is? No, something even greater awaits us. But so precious, these moments that we have, that we're so afraid we're going to lose them. And we're only going to focus on the ones that we don't want to lose. But fear not. It's right there in your nesting doll.